Hi, my name is Ginny and I teach guitar to adult beginners. I want to quick talk about 6 common pitfalls that I see in guitar players that are self-taught, mostly finding videos online. They don't have the feedback of a teacher watching over them as they learn things. And there's a lot of things they just don't know because nobody told them. And a lot of the videos that are teaching a specific song, things like that, don't remind people of the technique things that they need to be mindful of, or they assume that the student already knows it. So there are 6 things. Each of them are super important, and you've got to get these right and keep coming back and revisiting these 6 things, or they will hinder your progress. The first thing is kind of general. I think it's very important to picture in my mind a sloth in my left hand. My left hand, most of the problems tend to come from the left side of my body, of our bodies. I want you to think of a sloth. If you can picture a sloth hanging from a tree, its little claws are hanging on tight and holding all the weight of its entire body, and they're not light, and they're so relaxed. They're so relaxed, but those claws are gripping just enough. And there is no tension anywhere else except right in those tips. That's all it takes to hold the sloth onto that branch. So that's what I need you to envision your left hand as, a sloth. So as you're playing chords and you're pushing down, you want to keep that elbow and that arm nice and loose and relaxed. You don't actually need to move it, but it should not be tense or tight. We're going to come back to that more, and you'll see how that plays out in the future. But I'm going to refer to that sloth. So I also tell my students, you need to be lazy. You are working too hard. Very often, beginner guitar players, they work so hard. They are pushing so hard. They've got the neck in a death grip. Okay? Only work as hard as you need to. Be as lazy as possible. Do not move more muscles than you need to. Okay, so learn from the sloth. That's number 1. Number 2 is the placement of my fingers in relation to the neck. A lot of times people tend to put their fingers perpendicular to the neck. So if I'm playing an E minor chord, I see this a lot. My fingers are perpendicular to the neck. As you get further up, like to a G chord, you're gonna run into problems. I'm not gonna really explain it a whole lot right now, but just trust me, you're going to run into problems. What you need to do, instead of being perpendicular, you need to be at a 30 to 45 degree angle. So your fingers are coming from towards the headstock. So the way to do that, you can put a little wrist rotation in there. I kind of pull my wrist back. Sometimes I get my hand back, and sometimes I'm even touching the underside of the neck with my fingers, but most of that comes from opening my elbow. We're going to get to that again in a minute because that leads to another thing. So as opposed to being perpendicular, rotate back. Okay, then the next problem I tend to see is people playing kind of flat fingered. Okay, so I'm playing like this. I'm going to show it from another angle. Okay, my fingers, when I'm doing that, I'm thunk. Okay, so I'm hearing all kinds of thunking going on. And it is because these fingers are touching the other strings. So what do we do about that? Well, the problem is our fingers are too flat. So one of the common problems why people play flat-fingered is because their nails are too long. So you should not, when you look at your hands this way, your fingernails should not stick up above your fingers. They should be nice and short. This is even a little long for me. Okay, then when you play the guitar, when you push down, your fingers, you're gonna have to come from this angle, your fingers should be coming at the string, pretty much pressing down at a perpendicular. It's gonna be at a 90 degree angle where you're actually touching the strings, as opposed to this, where my place back here, yes, there, no, okay? Now, here's a problem why people have trouble with this. This knuckle right there is generally very weak. a lot of times, and I see this in all the instruments I teach, used to be primarily a piano teacher, and piano players did the same thing. This knuckle buckles. Well, if this knuckle buckles, then the problem is you're gonna touch these other strings. Oftentimes guitar players are pretty good with it with maybe these two fingers, but then by the time they get to some of the lower fingers, especially the ring finger, it really is weak and it buckles backwards. I remember reading somewhere in a study that about 60% of females are double jointed here. This is double jointed, and about 40% of males. I would bet it's even higher. A lot of people, their fingers bend backwards this way. And very rarely in life do we do anything that causes us to need to keep it this way and develop that muscle there. I have another video that teaches how to strengthen this muscle here so it does not buckle. So that's another problem, the flat fingers, okay? So sometimes it takes some strengthening of this muscle. Okay, the next problem can be the thumb. I say there are two areas, two body parts that are responsible for good playing and good technique. One is the thumb and the other is the elbow. So we'll address the thumb first. Lots of people hold the guitar incorrectly in their left hand. Look at this nice curved crook in your hand, and then look at this nice curved crook of the neck of the guitar. You would think, boom, they match up just right. I can play a D chord and it just fits in there so nicely. Wrong, that's not how you're supposed to play it. In fact, you want to keep your thumb wrapped around the back, or not wrapped, but against the back of the neck, around close to the thickest part of the neck. Now you'll change it for different chords, but basically you want to avoid wrapping it around this way. The other thing you want to avoid that is very common in beginners is putting it this way, parallel with the neck. Again, that's going to close your hand. It's going to cause all kinds of tension, especially here in your inner forearm. And there's going to be all kinds of problems. So where does your thumb go? So around the back, and then it should stay nice and open. Okay, so you should be able to see through your hand. Okay, a nice open hand. Fingers kind of not perpendicular, but at an angle coming from the headstock. Then the other thing you need to be aware of is your thumb should roughly, as a rule of thumb, pun intended, it should be about halfway between your highest and lowest finger. So if you've got a chord that you're stretching really far for, you don't want to have your thumb way back here. Okay, you want to have whatever you're doing with your fingers, your thumb should be the counterbalance about halfway between your fingers, your highest and your lowest finger. Some things you'll kind of adjust as you find your way. You'll find that each chord kind of has its own feeling, its own position, but those are kind of the general rule of thumb. The next thing is your elbow. You think playing correct chords and having technique is all here. Very little of it is here. It's your thumb and your elbow. The tendency is for people to have their elbows way too close to their bodies. Okay, so I'm playing guitar and I'm tense, and my arm is tense, and this is tense, and my hand is tense, and I'm gripping really hard, and my thumb is flat, and my elbow is against my body. If I pull my elbow out, A, I get a little bit more of that sloth motion. B, it corrects my thumb from being sideways. I can't do that. I can't have a loose elbow. And then C, three, it allows me more leverage in my fingers. I can get more range of motion here. If I'm here, I'm much more limited in where I can, how much I can move. So in order to give your elbow more space, I highly recommend either standing up or holding your guitar not way over on your right leg. If you hold it on your right leg, usually beginners do this so that they can see the strings right here. They're right close to their face. Okay, but what that does is it compacts everything there and you lose your range of motion and tension settles in real quick. So bring your elbow away from your body, okay? You don't want to have a close elbow. There will be exceptions to that later, but for now, loose elbow away from your body, thumb halfway between your fingers and around the back of the neck, not strangling your poor guitar's neck. Okay, the next problem that I see all the time, and this totally makes sense. You're learning a new chord. You are not familiar with the strings yet. You can't feel this. You haven't developed that sense of being able to just, your fingers being able to feel where they are, the accuracy that comes with practice. So we look, and when we look, we turn our guitar slightly up, okay? So lots of people, especially if they're not using a strap, they're sitting here practicing and they're like this, okay? And that angle is up so that they can see the neck. Makes perfect sense. Terrible, because what it does is it puts tension right in this spot right here in the wrist. So you want to get away from that. Tension is evil. Tension is your enemy. It always causes problems. Okay, so you've got to get out of the habit of turning your guitar up. Though two things you can do is, one, just constantly readjust. You'll do it, you'll get it, and you'll find, oh, I got my guitar turned up. Oh, okay, straighten it, get it perpendicular to the floor. The other way you can kind of solve that is by standing up. If you stand and have a strap, it's much harder. You can't really do that so much. You end up craning your neck over and you might get a stiff neck. But the best thing to do is just practice enough with not looking at your left hand, and in time, start with simple things and gradually build sequentially, so that you don't have to look so much. Do not start with a G chord. Do not start with G, C, and D. That is just the worst way to start. You're doomed for frustration if you do it that way. Not a good idea. Okay? So, and then the last thing I want to pull is just, and we kind of talked about this with the thumb, but the death grip on the guitar neck. You do not have to push hard. You do not have to push. Your thumb should not be squeezing. Your fingers should not be tense, and your arms should not be tense. You do not have to squeeze super hard. Here's the trick. You can test yourself on this. Okay, I have my finger down. The most efficient place to press is right behind that fret bar. Why? Because the reason that fret bar is lifted is because it acts as a lever and it pushes against the string. So it's not me physically pushing the string down. I mean, that does work, but that's definitely not the lazy way to do it. That is the most inefficient way. The more efficient way, and we'll say lazy, but it really is efficient. The most efficient way is to press right behind that fret bar. Then I hardly have to press at all. It's so easy. If I can get right behind there, I'm not pressing hard at all. I'm not squeezing hard. Here's a G chord. Here's another way of playing a G chord. And there I'm not even right behind the fret bar. But you don't have to push hard. This, I don't know if you can see the tension in my hand, is tense. This is just enough. This is tense. I can feel it in my bicep. I can feel it in my forearm. You should not feel it there. You should just feel a little bit, just enough tension between your thumb and your fingers. I hope you found this helpful. Revisit it often. Come back and check it after a couple weeks of playing. If you're interested in working with me, I'm doing a program for guitar for beginner adults, and we are going to meet in person, virtually, live online twice a week, and we can work out problems, and you can ask questions, and I can guide and oversee your development and your technique, and I have videos for you that are sequential, step-by-step, geared specifically for adults, because adult learners are different than teen or young adult learners I've found in my 10 plus years of teaching adults. It's a different, you need a different sequence, a different strategy. So that's what I am specializing in. Feel free to reach out to me, comment, or you can message me if you're on Facebook, or you can leave a comment on a YouTube channel, or you can find me at ginnymusic.com or join my Guitar for Beginner Adults Facebook group. I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your problems, your struggles, what you're working on, what you're hitting a wall against, and I would love to try to help you overcome them. I hope this was helpful. Thanks.